Hey guys, what is up? Awesome the Sauce here with the top 5 ways this new summer update in 2016 on Wizard101 will affect PvP. Now this is something that a lot of people were just asking me about. I'm not sure if my opinion is necessarily the best, but I thought I might as well give it because, you know, there are a lot of interesting things that will happen because of this update. So we're going to start off with number 5, which is the pets. Pets have always been block oriented. If you've seen my giveaways, if you've seen my PvPs, if you've seen a lot of other people PvP at top rank, they'll have a pet that looks something like this normally. Now obviously there are a lot of variations to this. You'll have Maycasts, you'll have a lot of things, but the block is very important. You very rarely saw a high ranking wizard without block on their pets, so without defender. Now defender is actually not going to be used at all anymore because a critical block only prevents about 25% damage, now that a critical is only 1.25 times the damage of a regular hit. So the better defense against a block pet is actually a critical is actually not a block pet but a ward pet. So what I actually predict we're going to see is a lot of balance, ice, and life wards popping up in the spiral. So for example, just to give you an idea of what a pet like that might be like, if you take this pet that I'm on right now and replace a block with maybe an ice ward, that would probably be one of the most popular pets in the new update. Double resist, balance ward, ice ward, and double damage for whatever school you're into. Now, that being said, there are also a lot of possibilities otherwise. If we take away the block, there's also a lot of possibilities for Maycasts. Maycast and Foul might be a really big one. Maycast and Feeble might be popularized. So that being said, pets at max level are actually going to be very similar to pets at low level. That's going to be one of the biggest parts of this new update. For example, one of the most successful pets I can already see would be a pet like this one. Or even this one right here. Just triple damage, double resist with the ward on. So, we'll see how the update really affects things, but definitely crit block pets are not going to be preferred, and they're eventually going to be tried out of the system. Number 4, Amulets! Hull! Because of the crit update portion of this update, Mastery Amulets are going to take over the arena once again. And this is why I say this. Normally, when you wanted crit block, it was really important because if you didn't have a crit block and a crit passed through, you basically lose the game. A crit really does mean, whether it's a small attack that crits or a big attack that crits, it normally will give the battle in favor of the person who actually crit. But now, since the stakes are much lower when you don't block a crit, people could be moving to Mastery Amulets. So it's really going to be an era of PvP that's going to be a lot more utility based. So the Rasputin Amulet is not going to be preferred compared to Mastery Amulet. So you can clearly see the difference when I'm comparing these two. The only real plus side to the Rasputin Amulet, when you're not looking at the jewels, is the resist and the block. Now, if people don't want the resist anymore and instead go for a more powerful strategy with masteries, then that might be a good sacrifice that they can make. I'm not exactly 100% sure this would be the best sacrifice, especially because of the 6 resist that you're losing. But in some cases, like with Fire, which only gets 4 resist from the amulet, I expect to see either a shift to the Morganth amulet so that crits are more possible, for strats like Power Link, where you don't need to land for a crit to actually be useful, or they'll switch right over to a Mastery Amulet. So it'll depend on the school. For example, Storm and Fire, they won't be switching over to any Mastery Amulets because they're hitters and they won't really need Mastery Amulets to do better in PvP. However, all other schools could definitely have viable strategies by switching. Even Myth. Myth used to be very much more powerful because they could heal. Now, when you have a school that absolutely cannot heal, and you make sure that they need to have an amulet that's not a life mastery, that's when you see them having problems in the arena. I expect to see them using life masteries more than almost any other school, and we're going to see how this affects PvP a lot, but I'm really excited about this, because with the return of a mastery, if you look at my stats, yeah, I have lower block. My incoming goes up because of it, and with the balance mastery, I can do a lot with dispels and reshuffs and other spells of that nature. So it's going to be a very big change. on the utility side. We're not going to see Rasputin amulets as much anymore, is what I'm predicting. Now, of course, this depends on some schools like Fire and Storm. If you want a more conservative setup, you should still stick with the Rasputin amulet, especially if you're a school with low health that can't afford to get crit on regardless. However, it should go it should be seen that a lot of schools, the Morgantha amulet is very important because it gives that blade. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's say I go to my ice, for example. Now, on my ice wizard, you would expect me to clearly favor the Rasputin amulet. However, when you're looking at the gem of the Grand Prophecy, those blades are extremely important. For a blading school like Life, this could be a very, very easy thing to use that people would prefer over the Rasputin amulet, especially because you actually gain Pierce, which is something that no one can get enough of, and especially also if you gain those blades. So it's going to be a very important shift that I think will actually make matches much less predictable. So the adding on of the chaos in PvP, it's going to be nice. You know, you won't clearly expect what everyone's going to do, and it's going to add diversity to the arena again, especially for those seeking diversity. Now, there's another portion of this that will appear on this top 5 that actually will change up PvP even more in terms of diversity, so stay tuned. Number 3! One of the most important changes in this update was actually a change that happened to Dark Nova. So right now, here's how Dark Nova will work. You'll cast it, and then you have to increase it from 400 to 1600 by doing what the Dark Nova likes. And while you do what the Dark Nova likes, it'll add a blade, it'll add a spear, and it'll add a trap. So that's how you buff up the Dark Nova. Now, the way most people would have done it before these updates happen, they would actually use Feint, and they would use Shatter on the last round. So basically they would blade with possibly a Shadow Blade from their wand, they would Feint, and then they would Shatter. Now, the reason Dark Nova is very, very, very powerful is because, and it's very underrated, it's because you can achieve 2 things in 1 round, which is very important in a game like Wizard101 where you're technically only ever able to do 1 thing every turn. It's why minions are very useful, and it's why overtimes are very useful. So when you can achieve more in 1 round, that's why the Dark Nova is really important. Now, the change that happened to Dark Nova is, 1, you don't have to actually boost this up from 400 to 1600. It'll stay at 1600 from the start. So that's 1 big perk. 2, it'll actually cast at an even shorter rate, so it only lasts 2 rounds instead of 3 rounds. 3, the backlash can be decreased all the way to 0 from my testing that I did in the test realm, which is really important because you can actually risk absolutely nothing in terms of damage if you just do what the Dark Nova likes. And 3, you can actually, because of this new update where crit's not as important, you can actually sacrifice a lot of block-oriented stats to cater to this. Now, here's what I'm going to be talking about. And as far as Dark Nova goes, when you're actually looking at some schools, they're meant to use Dark Nova, really. Dark Nova can be used easily by a balance and easily by a death. And the reason it's really good is because you can actually pull amazing combos. If you're going against a Guardian Spirit user, really all you gotta do, especially if you're first, this will work easily. You put up that Doom right before that Dark Nova hits and try to kill them with the Dark Nova and put up the Doom as well. Now, obviously, this is very situational. It's hard to do, but I've done it before, and it's really the easiest way to take down a Guardian Spirit. So I actually predict that if enough people start using this, the use of a Guardian Spirit will actually be compromised a lot. But added on to that, Dark Nova is going to be used a lot more by schools that would otherwise not be good in PvP. Death can use this very well. Balance, even though it's amazing at PvP as it is, can still use this very, very well, and actually could possibly be better than this. Now, because people aren't going to have to worry about block as much, we can actually move on to other stats as well, so universal damage might possibly be easier to get. So that's why I think, as far as stats and the diversity that's allowed and the specific change that's made to Dark Nova, this actually might be one of the most used spells in the new meta. But we're gonna have to see because there are obviously so many counters to shadow creatures, especially if you manage to stun the person using the Dark Nova, especially if you manage to weakness spam them because there's no mass cleanse. You know, there are obvious ways that this won't work. However, I see this as an easy way for some schools, especially like Death, to actually go back to the top, because this is a very, very useful strategy that just became even more OP and actually usable because of the new crit update. Number 2! Now, this is definitely one of the most unfortunate side effects of this update, and this might not even seem like, you know, a big thing, but it's gonna affect Storm very negatively as far as 1v1 goes, and definitely as far as 2v2 goes. And I'm gonna explain the reasons for this. Now, Storm has always been a very strong 2v2 class. You're able to have someone defend you and make up for the fact that you have low health and low resist, and you can actually amp up on crit and damage and do a lot of work. Now, that always has worked before. However, now, a very important combo has been removed from 2v2, and that's the ability for the person going first to cleanse off a dispel or a debuff so that the Storm can hit in that same round. Now, that theme of achieving more than one thing in that same round, that's going to be very hard because things like Juju and weaknesses, it's going to be, I'm pretty sure you can actually use a new weakness. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because I know it can't be used on a dispel, but it definitely can be used on something like a Virulent Plague. And I'm not sure if it's a Juju, but if it is a Juju, that's even worse. Now, Death is also a very common school to use in 2v2, and I definitely know the Virulent Plagues and Jujus, it's not even like, especially Virulent Plagues, they're not exclusive to Death. Anyone can use a Death Mastery, especially now that Masteries are able to be used again. What I'm saying, though, is that the ability to cleanse and then hit in the same round in 2v2, it's a very important way of winning. Like, it's actually one of the main ways people can win from second, because it's very hard to actually stack debuffs on someone when the guy right before them can cleanse it off. But because of the new enchant that protects things from cleanse, it'll be very hard for Storm to hit when they're pinned down by weaknesses. That's in 2v2. But in 1v1 as well, because of how less important crit is, I actually predict that Storm will have to make a huge change to be competitive in 1v1 anymore. And the big change I see now is if people lay off block enough, they're going to have to go after crit a lot more. So they're going to have to take what they can get with that 25 extra. So it's not going to be as much as before, but instead of a chancy 100% extra on a damage, they might be actually getting a guaranteed 25 extra percent on their damage hit because their crits will always go through if people lay off block enough. Another big upside to having much more crit is that you can actually crit all your healing currents, and if you use a heal enchant, especially like one of the new one, it could actually be something that you can reliably heal a lot. So what I see is a completely different change in Storm, and I think it's going to be one of the only schools to actually head off into more crit. I think the other schools are going to head off into other stats, which is the number 1 on this list, how stats are going to change up. Number 1! At the moment, undeniably, the most important stat for a wizard in the max level meta is block. Now, so many people put a huge emphasis on block, and there's a reason for this, obviously. If I put on my full gear, I'll show you exactly like what I'm talking about. If I put on my full gear, you'll actually see that block is, I put an emphasis on block to actually do well in PvP. This isn't even all of it, I don't even think. Yeah, I'm actually missing even more block. Let's say I put this. This is about the most block I can get with balanced stats. If you notice, I actually have 3 blocking jewels just for the purpose of... Wait, is it even 3? I think it might be 4. No, never mind. It is... Let's see. Oh, it actually is 4 because I'm not wearing the right one. So I actually have 4 blocking jewels, so I use all of my square sockets for blocking jewels. I also have a block pet. I have the Fatal Razor. I make sure that I have the most block on my wand, and I obviously have a block deck. Now, block is one stat that everyone centered their strategy around. But because block isn't as important anymore, the most important stat now is going to be resist and pierce. Now, why do I say that? Well, because the best defense against a critical used to be critical block. Now, you can still stick with that and prevent that plus 25%, but what I really predict is that people are going to account for that by actually amping up their resist. Now, how would you say that, you may ask? How would they do that, you may ask? Well, there are a lot of pieces of gear where the only reason you couldn't use it was because it was low block. Now, because block isn't as much of an issue, you can actually rework your gear completely. I actually see Jade gear being a possible application. I see I see a lot of pieces of gear. Now, I'm not exactly saying that, like, pieces of gear like this, like the Majoris Runners of Cohesion, for example, could be the best thing ever. However, what I do see is that before you couldn't even use this, but now there's really no major reason why you can't use it. Block was the only reason you couldn't, and now because it gives that extra critical and damage and health, you might actually want this. I'm not saying I don't recommend this, but I'm saying there are so many pieces of gear that you never could have considered before that you could consider now. But the reason resist is going to be the most important is especially because of that first point I made with pets. Pets are going to have ward talents a lot more now, so spells like Shrike are going to be a very, very important part of your deck. People are going to have to use Shrike a lot because they're never going to know if their opponents are setting or not. And another reason why the other talent I specifically mentioned was important, it's just Pierce, is because you need a counter against all that new resist. So now 42... Wait, actually, let me just put on this, so, you know, like, it does, like, if I'm not even looking for my block, actually, even this is pretty high. If I'm not looking for my block, I can get 44 Pierce pretty easily. So, in this case, I would only need an Infal instead of a Shrike to actually do as much damage as possible. But if you notice, like, you know, someone with high resist would really, they can only get damaged by someone with really high Pierce. So the reason why this new update is really important is because block is going to lose a lot more importance, and utilities, which are backed up by resist and Pierce, are going to be the next big thing. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Leave a comment in the space below telling me what you think the new update is going to be like. I'm going to put a link in the description to all the new updates that I covered, which is basically in a video called Everything You Need to Know About the New Updates. I did leave out the shadow spell part, but I did discuss it here, so you should be informed about it. But as far as I see it, this is going to shake up PvP a lot more than other updates, and I'm really, really liking the update. It really brings back meaning to things that schools are always meant to do, like balance, for example. I haven't healed in ages on this wizard, and I'm really looking forward to that. I think there's going to be a lot more strategy. There's going to be a lot more diversity in the perfect pet, because there really won't be a perfect pet anymore. And finally, which is something that's even more important. I had to close that out. Something is even more important. There's going to be spell diversity and strategy diversity. I really, really see people using Nova. I see people using things that they never would have used before because all they could really do was just out-spam each other. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Stay awesome. Leave your opinion below. And yeah!